sorts of interesting insights about a place that can be derived from a platform like this. It's very difficult to create a business case to pay for a platform on those bases, but we can pay for it on an operational basis and then open it up for other use. And so let's have a look at what some of those uses are and how you might find answers to them. So Birmingham has a particular problem with obesity. We're the obesity capital of Europe. 10% of children starting primary school in Birmingham are obese or overweight. 40% are obese or overweight by the time they leave primary school. That's not entirely the primary school's fault. And I've chosen to illustrate this with what are not my 4 favourite kebab shops in Birmingham from when I was a student there. A few years ago, we held a hackathon to try and understand how we could use data to address food issues in Birmingham. The set of people at the top spent an evening discussing food challenges in the city, trying to identify something to attack. Ood's Duty, who sat way over at the back there, eventually had the idea based on a family wedding he'd been to the previous weekend with 200 guests, where a lot of food had been produced, all in professional certified kitchens, and at the end it had gone to waste, and he asked, couldn't we have done something better with that? So over the course of the next 2 days, these fellas here put together an app using open source code that collected using open data information about all the professional food services in Birmingham, connected them to soup kitchens, homeless shelters and other places in need of more food to give out. That app is still available free as open source. By the way, usually when I give this presentation, someone remarks that whilst this is a reasonably racially mixed environment, it's almost entirely men. That's an outstanding issue with the technology industry. I have no idea how to fix it, but I don't want to just gloss over that fact because that's not Birmingham represented in that room. It's only about half of it at best. The other challenge with this, of course, is an app that connects information about food producers and soup kitchens is potentially useful, but it doesn't actually result in people getting in vans and driving the food from one place to another. We haven't solved that problem yet, but some interesting things have happened when we've tried to solve it. So to start to try to solve it, we formed something called the Birmingham Smart City Alliance. And organisations like this have popped up in many towns, many cities around the country. Using various different models. The Alliance is a wholly non-commercial collaboration. All these organisations do, many of them are large institutions, public or private, with resources. Some of them are explicitly tasked with supporting innovation. So Innovation Birmingham is on here, the local tech startup incubator. Others are more unexpected. So OpenStreetMap, their chief technology officer, happens to live in Birmingham. Droplet are a local startup company. So there's some unusual suspects in here. And it's those unusual suspects and their innovation we tried to tap to solve the problem more substantially. So some of you might remember Nick Holzer from The Apprentice a few years ago. He was turned down by Alan Sugar, but is now employing 20 people in Birmingham, successfully running the business that he was going to propose, which is around selling food online using recipes as the hook. Dominic Campbell, I was talking to Richard about earlier, runs an organisation called FutureGov that create public service innovations. So in Staffordshire, for example, they run something called Casserole Club, which uses social media to connect people who can't cook for themselves with people who are happy to volunteer to cook for a neighbour and take some food round. So it's a social model with a self-sustaining business model that takes the need off the council to run Meals on Wheels, which is something they struggle to afford to provide. James Swanston is, when he's not being a major in the Territorial Army, runs a company called Carbon Voyage here in London, who create information-based transport innovations. So they've, for the last couple of years, been controlling all of the deliveries in and out of the Earls Court Conference Centre. Simply by scheduling vans, giving them a defined slot, they've almost entirely reduced the number of traffic jams that are resulting as a result of those queuing up. What we hoped would come out of this was a model for sustainably delivering food around Birmingham in a different way. But of course, bottom-up innovation isn't like that, and some different things happened. One was we found out about a transport problem to do with the Longbridge factory redevelopment. This is the old Rover site, a huge area, many square miles, being redeveloped by St Modwins into a new town. The problem was throughout that development, all of the Arctics bringing construction materials were trying to find a postcode for Longbridge, and they got sent to the village of Northfield just down the road, which they stuffed up completely. These fine orange t-shirted gentlemen helped to solve that problem. This is Brian, the Chief Technology Officer of OpenStreetMaps. This fella here is a Wikipedia editor. They are fans of open source mapping. We arranged through St Modwins for them to have access to the site. Lo and behold, they walked around it for a weekend, mapped the whole thing properly, and believe it or not, the sat-nav providers use OpenStreetMaps as a major source of information. And because these guys are volunteers with a passion for it, then as the town centre redevelops, they go around again and they keep it up to date much more regularly than most of the other mapping providers. Net result, no more Arctics in Longbridge. We found Centro some help as well. So Centro have been trying to create transport innovations in Birmingham. They have a fraction of the authority that TfL and Transport for Greater Manchester have, and they have very few resources. So they held a collaborative effort using the network of the Alliance to form an idea of what the challenges and opportunities for transport to work differently in Birmingham are, but they did it in partnership with the local tech incubator, so that when 10 ideas came out of the hackathon, any one of those that could convincingly create a case that it was going to lower the carbon impact of transport managed to get a grant from an EU climate programme through the incubator, with the net result that we now have some live trials about to start in the next month using no new money from Centro. And we did do something about food in an entirely unexpected direction. Shalene Mealer and Robert Smith opened the Harborne Food School earlier this year in a repurposed council building. Lucky enough to get Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall to support it. We're now working with the food school and with Crowdfunder to create a programme to support by providing funding to projects to tackle that childhood obesity problem. So all the way back to the original problem, for very unexpected routes, we've now got more resources to solve it. So why is all this relevant to the smart city agenda? Why do things like this, which are not wholly commercial, matter so much? Well, this is the reason. These are graphs that I first found in a book called The Second Machine Age by two MIT economics professors. And what they're comparing is growth in GDP, growth in the economy, with growth in household wages. So let me just take a look over here. Around about 1983, so as technology really started to take off as the PC was invented, GDP growth split off from household income. This is why I pointed out that question around what happens to the value created by Airbnb with so few employees. We have started to dissociate the benefits of economic growth with household income rises for ordinary people. So the pure market nature of these innovations isn't working to address those objectives that cities and communities are setting out for themselves. So one of the things we're doing is looking for the answer to that. All of those initiatives I described to you in Birmingham are trying to tackle that sort of problem. Challenge is they're mostly very small scale, they're mostly social enterprises. It's difficult to get those things to scale. So we're trying to take some insight from the world of town planning into how we might address that. If any of you choose to look into the history of design patterns, which were the design tool that formed the computer architectures we know today, the design pattern was actually invented by a town planner, Christopher Alexander, in around about 1970 or so. The wiki was built by people to share these design patterns in collaboration with Alexander. So technology and town planning have unexpected and long-term shared roots. And this is an initiative that might be showing us a way forward there. Kelvin Campbell is an architect supported by the Great Exhibition of 1851. I had no idea that was still going, but it is. And he's asking the question, what are the characteristics of urban policy and infrastructure that give rise to massive amounts of small-scale innovation? His thinking's coming out of trying to deal with mass urbanisation around the world. When you have mass urbanisation, you get slums, because by definition you can't afford to build the infrastructure and the housing fast enough to support the migration. What Kelvin's looking at is, can you prepare areas with basic grid patterns and party wall infrastructure so that when those slums build, they're built on slightly better quality infrastructure and there's the right network to go and retrofit in utilities afterwards. So what we're trying to do is apply the same thinking to technology infrastructure in cities. So these are some principles that are emerging from this work that you can try and look at putting into planning and development policy. The British Standards Institute has adopted some of this thinking and published a standard on that recently. As a result, one of the most exciting projects I think in the country at the moment is the Eastwick and Sweetwater development in the London Olympics legacy. When that development opportunity was being awarded to the private sector, one of the scored criteria in the development competition was was for the developers to demonstrate how their proposal would include investment in technology infrastructure, not just to benefit the residents and businesses in the new development, but to contribute to existing communities and business economies in adjacent areas. That to me is the most exciting idea I've seen in years of working in smart cities, and it took a tiny fraction of a multi-$100 million pension fund investment in property and used it to invest in technology to create social mobility and economic growth. That's just one idea though, and it applies in the area of town planning and development. To my mind, we need similar ideas in all sorts of other areas of the economy to help to understand how we can influence the phenomenal creativity that technology enables people to create